Welcome to my channel. What if silence itself could turn into a weapon? In the burning dust of a secret training ground, one recruit armed with nothing but her grandfather's battered scope uncovers a legacy hidden from history. Betrayal, impossible shots, and ghosts of forgotten wars lead her into Project Sable, a program where instinct is deadlier than any machine. They called it Dust River Training Facility, but it was nothing like a river and everything like a kiln. The desert heat clung to your skin like a second uniform bio 600 hours. Mirage danced over the gravel, and grit snuck under every collar. I'd seen hot mornings, but this place burned memory itself. I stood behind the line with the others, recruits shoulder to shoulder, all geared up with the latest gear, sleek scopes, carbon fiber tripods, and custom optics so polished you could shave with the reflection. Not me. I cradled an M21 long-range rifle that should have been retired 20 years ago. The matte black paint had chipped to reveal scuffed metal beneath. I'd taken it from the base armory because it was standard issue, because I didn't need the gear to tell me if I could shoot. The rifle slung across my back wasn't the part that bothered them. It was the scope. It was old. Brass edges tarnished green, the lens clouded like morning frost. It rode inside a cracked leather case that looked like something rescued from a war museum. My grandfather's. I didn't explain that. I heard them before I saw them. Lance Corporal Mitchell laughed first, sharp and loud, like he wanted everyone to join in. What's that, Rena? Antique Roadshow? Then came Private York. Careful with that scope. Blink at it wrong, and it'll turn to dust. Even my range team leader, Sergeant Blaine, smirked. You sure it won't just show you sepia-tone memories? I didn't answer. I set up my tripod with deliberate care, twisting the knobs until they stopped resisting. I knew every tick in the worn dials. The scope clicked into place with a finality that hushed my hands. Still, they laughed. That was when Captain Reese Holloway, the range commander, stepped over from his post. He moved like the years had weighed him down, scars lining his jaw like slashes in old leather. He reached out for the scope. I handed it to him without flinching. His brow furrowed the moment he touched it. His thumb slid along the barrel, wiping away a layer of dust. And there, faint but unmistakable, etched into the rim, 431 YD, Ravine 98 confirmed. Something shifted. His face stiffened, mouth a line carved from stone. He looked up. Where'd you get this? It belonged to my grandfather, Captain Elijah Marin. He gave it to me when I turned 13. He stared at me for a heartbeat too long. The captain handed the scope back, but his voice had changed. Set your shot. No gadgets. No smart interface. Just wind, distance, breath, and instinct. I lowered into prone at the 1,000-yard mark. The steel plate shimmered like a ghost in the heat mirage. A few murmurs behind me. Someone whispered, "She's just trying to save face. No way she lands it." I exhaled once. Let my body sink into the earth. Felt the tickle of wind brush my cheek left to right. Read the shimmer off the grass. Listen to the silence. Then I fired. The crack was sharp, like the sky splitting in two. A beat. Then the plate rang out like a bell struck with purpose. Dead center. The laughter died. I looked up. Their expressions had shifted. Not awe. Just the kind of confusion that comes when the world refuses to follow the rules you know. Blaine muttered something about luck, but Captain Holloway didn't speak. He simply turned away and walked. It should have ended there, but he stopped 5 steps later. Recruit Marin, he said over his shoulder. Report to my office. 1,600 hours. Bring the scope. I didn't return to the barracks right away. After the drills ended, I sat under the only bit of shade near the edge of the compound, a dry, half-collapsed pavilion that looked like even termites had given up on it. I laid the scope across my lap. Brass edges, cracked leather, a small dent near the base where the old man once told me it caught shrapnel. I turned it slowly in my hands, every scratch familiar. But now it felt different. At 1,550 hours, I was outside Captain Holloway's office, the scope slung in its case over my shoulder. I knocked. A voice, low, unreadable, answered from within. The room smelled like gun oil, sun-baked leather, and silence. Captain Reese Holloway stood by the window, arms crossed, his eyes tracking something unseen beyond the glass. At the desk sat another man I hadn't seen before. Tall, clean-cut, silver bars on his collar that gleamed without apology. His nameplate read Colonel Marcus Drenner. You know who your grandfather was? The colonel asked after a moment. I know what he taught me. I know he didn't like telling stories unless they were true. Captain Holloway gestured to the scope. Show him. I unclasped the leather, unrolled the cloth, and handed the scope over. Drenner examined it like a historian with an ancient text. Then he saw the engraving. His jaw tightened. Ravine 98, he muttered. We buried that op. You're saying this thing's legit? Holloway asked, though I could hear in his voice he already knew. Oh, it's more than legit, Drenner said. Your grandfather wasn't just another spotter. He was one of the last shadow spotters. Covert forward observers. Ghosts who walked through fire and called the wind. I blinked. That's not in any record I've seen. Drenner chuckled without humor. It wouldn't be. They scrubbed all of it. Ghost ops from before your time. But your grandfather, Elijah Marin, was a myth among snipers. They said he could read the sky like it was scripture. That scope has seen things most classified files haven't. Holloway added, which brings us to why you're here. You shot clean through every variable today without a single assist. Not even your spotter's numbers. I trusted the air, I said softly. He gave me readings, but they didn't match what I felt. They exchanged glances. Drenner leaned back, then opened a thick folder. This isn't regular training anymore. There's a program. Off the books, off the grid. Project Sable. I swallowed hard. I'd heard rumors. Only ever whispers between instructors or older recruits who drank too much. Project Sable selects those with instincts beyond the metric charts, Drenner continued. Not just shooters. Readers. Hunters. People who can see through chaos and pull order from it. You think I qualify? I asked, voice low. Holloway stepped closer, voice grave. We don't think. We know. That plate you hit today, that wasn't just distance. That was a test. He handed me back the scope. If you say yes, there's no turning back. Sable isn't about medals. It's about operating where no one else can. And if you're half the marksman Elijah Marin was. I'm not him, I interrupted. I don't need to be. Silence followed. Then Drenner nodded once. Pack your kit. Wheels up at 0400. No announcements. No goodbyes. Bring the scope. It goes where you go now. I stood, saluted. Understood. As I stepped out into the evening heat, something shifted inside me. The dust still swirled. The sun still burned. But now I wasn't just the woman with the antique gear and quiet eyes. I was a link in a chain far older than I'd ever imagined. I returned to the barracks, locked the door behind me, and sat on my bunk. The scope lay across my knees again. I adjusted the eyepiece gently, and that's when I felt it. A ridge that hadn't been there before. I twisted. Click. The metal gave way just slightly, and from inside, folded tight, was a strip of paper. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. 3 words, written in ink faded by years, but still legible. Trust the hush. Beneath it, initials, EM. A whisper of dust swept through the open window, brushing the note in my hand. The desert spoke its silence. And for the first time, I listened. Tomorrow, I'd leave Dust River. But tonight, I met the ghost who'd never truly left. We departed Dust River under the veil of early dark. No fanfare. No briefing. Just a transport truck waiting in the outer lot. Engine rumbling low like it knew better than to ask questions. 4 of us boarded. First was Private Layla Carr, sharpshooter, quiet but sharp. Her hands never stopped moving, like they were memorizing every twitch of the earth. Then came Sergeant Mateo Briggs. Broad, quiet, eyes that calculated odds with every breath. If you stood near him long enough, you'd swear you could feel time slow down. Third was Corporal Eli Banner. Former engineer, turned scout. He looked like someone who solved problems by cutting through them. And then there was me, Rena Marin, riding in silence with my grandfather's scope wrapped in canvas across my lap. None of us spoke as the truck threaded into the highlands. Hours passed. The scenery shifted from desert scrub to pine-choked ridges. The roads narrowed. The air thinned. Eventually, the truck rolled to a stop beside a nondescript concrete building flanked by a chain-link fence and an access point with no visible guards. But they were watching. You could feel it. A figure emerged from the shadows. Worn fatigues, a salt and pepper beard, arms like braided wire. His voice scratched like it had weathered too many battlefields. Welcome to Sable Ridge, he said flatly. I'm Master Sergeant Anders. From now on, you don't train. You adapt. He turned and started walking. We followed. No one asked questions. The inside of the compound was silent, too silent. No clatter of boots. No echo of drills. Just the sound of distant wind and the soft hiss of doors sliding open to let us pass. Our quarters were small, tight, and private. One bed, one footlocker, one desk. On mine sat a sealed folder labeled simply, Redacted, Phase 1, Vigilance. Inside was a map of the surrounding mountain range. Dozens of topographical notes hand-sketched in red pencil. There were marks for wind routes, thermal rises, animal migrations. It didn't look like a mission plan. It looked like someone had charted the mountain's breath. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of nerves. Because of the silence. Real silence doesn't hum. It presses. And this place? It didn't whisper. It watched. At 0400, the alarms didn't blare. Doors simply unlocked. Anders barked once. Form up. We did. Diagnostic day, he said. 650 to 1550 meters. 3 shots at each range. No tech beyond analog. Spotter rotation. Judgment starts now. Car went first. Her stance was fluid, methodical. She hit every plate up to 1200. Missed the last 2. Briggs was forceful. Calculated. A heavy hand with a measured breath. But he struggled against the wind past 1300. Banner had an engineer's touch, good adjustments, decent groupings, but lacked rhythm. When my name was called, I stepped forward with the scope slung under my arm. No gadgets, Anders said, eyeing the old case. This is analog, Sergeant, I replied. Just older than most. He nodded once. Then show us why it still breathes. I dropped into prone, set the scope, and let the world fade. 650 was easy. 3 crisp hits. 900, I adjusted slightly. 2 perfect strikes, 1 slight drift. Mirage played tricks, but I watched the grass near the base flutter. The wind turned vicious. I held my breath longer. Trusted the hush. All 3 connected. I missed one. My first shot curved wide. The second clipped edge. Then came the third. I paused. No calculation. Just the silence. The breath of the earth. The way it curled through the trees on the ridge and pushed sideways across the stone. Then I fired. The clang rang out after 3 heartbeats. Bullseye. The recruits behind me were quiet. No one said a word. Anders stared for a long time. Where'd you learn to read like that? My grandfather said, if you listen long enough, even the wind forgets to lie. He grunted. Approval, maybe. Hard to tell with that man. We were dismissed to the mess hall after that. No cheers. No bragging. Just the sound of boots over concrete. Car sat beside me. That scope's more than brass and lenses, huh? It's not the scope, I said, fingers resting on the worn leather. It's what it's seen. That night, as I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, I thought about the paper folded inside. Trust the hush. Maybe that was the first lesson of Project Sable. Noise speaks, but the hush, it remembers. 2 days later, they took us to the ridge. We woke to Anders already waiting outside, the sky still black with early dawn. He didn't speak much, just motioned toward the trucks. Today's trial is not about scores. It's about pressure, he finally said, his voice flat as ever. 1 round. 1 target. 1 chance. We rode up winding roads flanked by cliffs so steep they made your stomach fold. The trucks halted at the base of what they called Iron Jaw Ridge, a brutal stretch of rock and wind that jutted over a canyon floor nearly 2 clicks down. At the summit, they'd set up firing lanes overlooking a solitary steel plate at 1,800 meters. Wind screamed through the cut like it hated anyone who tried to read it. Anders turned to us, the same expression carved into his face like it had never changed. You each get 3 rounds. Score is simple, center hit is a pass. Anything less is just noise. Car went first. Her first shot clipped the edge. Second missed wide. Third struck closer, but not clean. Briggs had raw power, and he adjusted for the gusts well. 1 hit dead center. Anders nodded slightly. Banner got creative. He used a slide rule and hand calculations. 2 shots wide, 1 nearly on mark. Nearly. Then it was my turn. I unwrapped the scope on the firing mat. Every move deliberate, like I'd done it for years. I laid the silk cloth beside the rifle, my grandfather's old spot check strip with hand-drawn markers. I traced the lines with my finger. Anders loomed behind me, arms folded. You trust that thing more than numbers? I trust what doesn't lie, I answered. The wind howled in my ears, but I could hear something deeper under it, like the breath of the mountain itself. First shot. I felt the moment it lined up. Crack. Bullseye. Clean. Second shot. Adjusted slightly left, countering the curl of the thermals rising off the rocks. Crack. Hit. Dead center again. Now the third. The wind changed, subtle, but real. It twisted down the ridge with an undercurrent of heat. Mirage formed and vanished in bursts. I closed my eyes. Trust the hush. I opened them. No doubt. No noise. Crack. The echo returned after a long pause. Third bullseye. Silence. Even Anders took a step forward. She found it, he muttered. Carr stared. Briggs let out a low breath. Banner shook his head with a grin. That wasn't shooting, he said. That was reading poetry. We packed up. No one needed to say who had passed. It was written on the steel. That night, I stayed behind on the range. The stars above Sable Ridge were sharper than I'd ever seen them. My scope lay on the map beside me. I turned the eyepiece slowly and stared through it. Not at a target, but at the horizon. And that's when I felt it. Someone watching. Not the instructors. Someone else. From the tree line beyond the compound. A silhouette. Still, dark, but familiar. Not threatening. Just aware. I blinked. Gone. Only the trees whispered now. But I felt something shift. Like the ghosts of Sable Ridge were stirring. I closed the scope's lens and wrapped it tight again. This was no longer training. It was inheritance. The next morning, the rhythm of Project Sable cracked. It wasn't drills or diagnostics on the board. Instead, Anders handed us sealed folders, each marked with a blue stripe and a 7-digit code. When I opened mine, I found satellite photos. Forest terrain, a river bend, concrete buildings tucked beneath tree cover, and a face. Merrick Voss. I knew the name. Everyone did. A rogue operator turned mercenary leader, responsible for at least 3 attacks on Allied outposts. Confirmed planner behind the Granger Crossing massacre. And now, hidden in a covert facility buried in the highlands of Andalusia province. Colonel Drenner walked into the briefing room. His expression was harder than usual. This isn't simulation, he said flatly. This is an insertion. The room stilled. No shifting. No questions. You've been fast-tracked because you earned it. Now you're going to prove Sable wasn't wrong. He pointed to the map. Targets exposed only once daily. Dawn prayer, courtyard, no drones, no artillery. Too many hostages inside. You have 1 shot, 1 window. He turned to me. Marin, it's your shot. I didn't nod. I just said, range? 3,728 meters, replied Anders. Nearly 2.5 miles. Even Briggs looked down. Banner exhaled through his nose. Impossible, Carr whispered. But I didn't look away. Because something stirred in me. Not fear. Not doubt. Just stillness. Later that night, inside the prep hangar, I sat alone with the scope. I'd stripped it bare, oiled every thread, wiped every glass. The slip of paper still lay folded beside me. Trust the hush. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows. I whispered aloud. You better be watching, old man. By 0300, we were loaded into a quiet bird. No insignia, no transponder. The black MH-47 flew nap of the earth, hugging terrain so tightly I felt every twist in my bones. Carr sat beside me, silent. Briggs had his eyes closed. Banner just stared out at the dark. Anders rode at the rear, unmoving. We touched down just before first light. The mountain air sliced deep, cold and thin. We moved fast, hiking 3 clicks uphill to a rocky outcrop. Curry, the spotter attached from Sable Command, unrolled his sensors, quietly calling out conditions. But I didn't look at the data. I read the grass near the ridge, watched the dust spiraling above a ledge, listened to the pitch of the wind. The facility came into view below, a rectangular courtyard flanked by watchtowers. 2 minutes, Curry whispered. Target approaches. I adjusted the scope. There he was. Merrick Voss. Broad, confident, kneeling toward the east. Then, a child appeared, barefoot, chasing a ball into the courtyard. My breath caught. He stopped, just beside the target. My finger froze on the trigger. The hush swelled. No shot. Seconds passed. The boy retrieved the ball, jogged away. The door shut again. The courtyard empty. Another minute. Then it reopened. Voss stepped back out, alone. Curry whispered data. Wind at 8 from the west. Thermal lift. Drop adjustments. all precise. I listened, then laid the silk strip beside me, ran my hand across the old lines. The hush came, and I fired. The bullet cut through 2.5 miles of shifting air, thermals, gusts, sheer distance. It struck. Voss collapsed silently onto the mat. No alarms. No alert. Just the silence returning like it had never left. Target down, whispered Curry. I heard nothing but the hush. Back at Sable Ridge, Drenner met us as we disembarked. No speech. No congratulations. Just a small wooden box. Inside, a silver medallion etched with a mountain and a flame. Only 12 have earned this, he said. Then handed it to me. Your grandfather was first. I held it in my palm. The weight didn't feel like metal. It felt like memory. I stood in the middle of the ceremony hall with the medallion still resting in my hand. There was no applause. No uniforms lined up in honor. No photographers. Just the silence of Project Sable's inner circle. Colonel Drenner, Anders, Carr, Briggs, Banner, and a few shadowed figures I'd never seen before. The 12th flame, Drenner said quietly. That's what they'll call you, if they talk at all. He slid a document across the table. You're being offered dual role, operator and instructor. Teach the hush method. Pass it forward. I stared down at the signature line. You don't have to decide now, Anders said, folding his arms. You could keep running missions. Live between shadows. Never say a word. I thought of the ridge. Of Carr's silence beside me. Of Briggs's controlled breath. Of Banner solving wind like a riddle. I'll do both, I said, signing the form. You don't build a legacy to hoard it. The next 6 months passed like smoke on the wind. I ran missions, 4 in total, all off book, all with precision. But I also began to teach. They gave me a corner of the range at first, a handful of new recruits who still thought their scopes were smarter than their eyes. I let them believe it, until the drill started. One day, Carr joined me, not as a student, but as a silent observer. Then Briggs started helping with drills. Then Banner sat down during a theory block and offered insights none of the rookies could challenge. We weren't just becoming teachers. We were becoming echoes. Every operator that passed through my corner left changed. Not always because they shot better, but because they listened more. The hush method wasn't about silence. It was about removing everything that didn't matter until only the truth remained. Then, one morning, I stepped onto the range and saw 7 new recruits lined up. All fresh, all cocky. One of them, a young lieutenant, probably no more than 20, nudged his partner and nodded toward the scope case I laid beside my mat. With respect, Captain Marin, he said loud enough for others to hear. That relic belongs in a museum. I didn't flinch. So I was told once, I replied. Go ahead. Compare it. I slid the scope toward him. He leaned in, scoffing at first, until the lens focused. His smirk faded. He didn't speak again. The others watched. Silent. I didn't lecture them. Didn't tell them about the ridge or Merrick Voss or the child in the courtyard. Some lessons don't fit in words. The screen beside the mat flickered. White text blinked against black. Hush isn't silence. It's control. I watched the recruits stare. One of them muttered, "What does that mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up the scope, set it on the mat beside a modern digital model, and let the wind do the talking. The final voice on the screen belonged to Drenner, recorded months before. Records fade. Numbers shift. But knowledge endures. The screen cut to black. And somewhere, I imagined my grandfather smiling, just a little, as the hush carried his voice one echo further into the world. By the time the snow fell across Sable Ridge, I had trained nearly 20 recruits. Not all passed. Some couldn't let go of the numbers. Others couldn't quiet their minds long enough to hear what the world was actually saying. But a few, just a few, felt it. Those were the ones who stayed after hours, who watched grass sway at twilight, who adjusted their breath to match the wind. Anders watched them closely. He never said much, but I noticed he stopped showing up with a clipboard. He started showing up with a chair. They're not just students anymore, he told me one night, as we stood near the overlook above the range. You're building something bigger than just shooters. I didn't answer. I just looked out at the valley, where a lone recruit knelt behind her scope in the snow, waiting for the wind to speak. That winter, Drenner called me to a different room than usual. A lower level, deeper into the complex than I knew existed. The hallway was lined with old plaques and locked cases. Medals with no names. Photos with faces blurred or scratched out. At the end of the hall, a vault-like door opened with a code I wasn't allowed to see. Inside, a small room, a steel table, and one object on it. A second scope, nearly identical to my grandfather's, same brass edges, same leather cover, but newer, cleaner, untouched. This one belonged to Harper Kell, Drenner said. You probably haven't heard the name. I hadn't. She was the second flame. Operated in Siberia. Single-handedly eliminated a rogue convoy with a 3,400-meter shot in whiteout conditions. Died 6 months later in a glacier collapse. He tapped the scope. No one's used it since. Until now. He looked at me. I want you to decide who gets it. I stared at the scope. The weight of it wasn't in the metal. It was in the silence it carried. Not yet, I said. Drenner nodded once. When you know, you'll know. Later that week, I returned to the range and watched as 3 recruits took turns in the long-distance trial. Private Kai Donovan, precise but jittery. Corporal Mira Salas, strong instincts, but second-guessed herself. And Lieutenant Jace Nolan, steady hands, no ego, always watching. After the trial, I found Jace cleaning gear. You ever hear of Harper Kell? I asked. No, he said, looking up. Should I have? No, I answered. But you will. The next day, I handed him the scope. Didn't explain. Didn't need to. He just took it, examined it, and nodded once. Sometimes you don't pick legacy. Sometimes legacy picks you. Legacy doesn't travel clean. It gathers dust, scars, sometimes blood. You can carry it with pride, but never without weight. 2 months after I passed Harper Kell's scope to Jace, Project Sable was compromised. It started with a data leak. A local contractor, cleared only for surface operations, sold information. Nothing major at first. Just maps, schedules, training routines. Until someone dug deeper. They found our ridge coordinates, wind maps, scope logs, names. The leak was traced to a third-party vendor, small-time operator with debts and a tendency to talk too much. We found him before the information spread, but not before someone else found us. 3 days after the breach, an operation in southeastern Caracas went sideways. A team of our Sable recruits, led by Carr, was inserted to eliminate a weapons trafficker holed up in a hillside temple. They never made it to the temple. The convoy was ambushed. Pre-planned. Precise. The attackers knew their route, their frequency, their fallback code. Carr got one transmission out before the line cut. Betrayal. Inside. We mounted a retrieval op within 6 hours. Anders led it himself. Briggs and I went with him. We found 3 bodies. Carr's wasn't one of them. Just her scope, snapped at the hinge, tossed in the mud like a message. Back at Sable Ridge, I walked into the war room while Anders was still shouting at Drenner. You sent them out too soon, he was saying. I told you they weren't ready. They were ready enough, Drenner snapped. What they weren't was protected. That's on us. They both looked at me as I entered. Did she send coordinates? I asked. Anders's jaw clenched. Just her last bearing. I nodded. Then she's not dead. Not yet. Drenner looked at me with something between hesitation and hope. You're not suggesting. I'm requesting. I cut in. Let me take a team. I know Carr's shooting. If she's breathing, I'll find her. Silence. Then Anders nodded. You choose who goes. I picked Jace. He'd proven the hush didn't just live in old brass. Briggs, because I trusted his breath more than any redoubt. Banner, because he saw what others missed. We left at night. Silent. Swift. No backup. Just our scopes and the shadows. 3 days through terrain that felt like the earth had grown teeth. Then we found her, pinned in a cave. Wounded. Bleeding, but alive. She hadn't given up. Not once. She'd drawn her own wind charts on the rock wall, counting shifts by ash trails from a tiny campfire. She saw us and just said, "Took you long enough." We carried her out under cover of night. No gunfire. No words. Only the hush between footsteps. When we brought Carr back to Sable Ridge, Anders was waiting at the gate. He didn't speak, just took her weight from Banner and carried her inside himself. She was treated and stabilized. Broken ribs, punctured lung, fractured leg. But she survived. She survived because she remembered the hush. The silence between the pain. The stillness that let her breathe beneath chaos. But something had changed at Sable Ridge. The breach had shaken trust. Files were reviewed. Every line of code examined. Every recruit and handler re-verified. I asked Drenner one night, while he stared at the wall of blurred portraits near the mess hall. Why us? I said. Why pick people like Carr, like Jace? Why pull ghosts out of our scopes and teach them to walk again? He didn't look at me when he answered. Because the battlefield changed, and machines will never read silence the way people can. He turned then. You want to know what Emberline used to be? I nodded. He unlocked a cabinet behind his desk, one I hadn't seen open before. Inside were 3 older scopes. Each had an engraving on the rim. Each bore initials. The first I recognized, E.M. My grandfather's. The second, H.K. Harper Kell. The third, unknown. Just a single symbol. A spiral, like a wind turning back on itself. That one, Drenner said, pointing, belonged to the first hush. The first what? He didn't clarify. Just said, there were only a few. Before tech. Before sensors. They trained using nothing but instinct. They could see patterns in heat, in dust, in the way leaves turned at dusk. You're part of that line now, Rena. You understand what they understood. That the hush doesn't just guide the shot, it is the shot. I swallowed. Because I felt it. Not pride. Responsibility. Later that week, I stood on the range again. Jace was instructing now, side by side with me. Briggs helped Carr recover by running new drills. Banner had taken over cartography for our wind maps. He didn't just draw terrain anymore, he breathed it. Our unit wasn't just passing tests. We were building something. A tradition, perhaps. But more than that, a way of seeing. And yet, the more I taught it, the more I realized how fragile it was. All it took was one breach. One betrayal. One ego too loud to hear the wind's warning. So I started teaching something new. Not just how to fire, but how to wait. How to listen. How to know when not to pull the trigger. Because power without discipline is just noise. And noise is what kills legacies. Spring came slowly to Sable Ridge. The frost cracked like old bone, rivers swelled, and for the first time in months, the range bloomed green. But the silence remained. Not the hollow kind. The true silence. The kind we had earned. Carr returned to the field after 6 weeks. Her first shot was off by inches. Her second, dead center. She didn't cheer, just nodded once and whispered, still here. Jace earned his flame 2 weeks later, making him the 13th. When I gave him the medallion, I told him what I hadn't told anyone yet. You're going to be better than me. He looked at me, surprised. But I meant it. Because that's what the hush teaches. It's not about being the best. It's about knowing when to let go. Let someone else rise. Let the next hand carry the silence forward. Later that summer, I took a leave of absence. First one I'd allowed myself since Emberline drafted me into its shadows. I took the scope with me. Not to a museum. Not to a mountain. But to a house in the flat edge of Wyoming. Where the wind whispered different stories. Slow ones, lazy ones. Not tactical, but true. There, I unpacked the scope, cleaned it one last time, and laid it beside a photograph. My grandfather, Samuel Marin, sat on a porch in that photo, laughing at something long forgotten. Next to it, I placed a small note. His, folded and yellowed, still legible after all these years. Trust the hush. I added a new one below it. It speaks now in more voices. Then I placed the medallion beside them. Not because I was finished, but because someone, someday, would need to find these. Maybe another quiet soul with no gadgets, no algorithms, just a breath and a beat, and the willingness to listen. Back at Sable Ridge, Jace had taken over primary instruction. Briggs ran endurance trials. Carr oversaw wind pattern intelligence. Banner had mapped more of the surrounding terrain than the satellites had ever captured. We had become what Drenner feared and hoped for all at once. Legacy. One evening, I returned just to observe. I didn't announce it. I watched a new recruit miss a shot at 1,300 meters. He cursed under his breath. Jace knelt beside him and asked simply, "Did you hear it?" "Hear what?" the kid asked, frustrated. Jace smiled. "Then you're not ready to shoot." And just like that, I knew. The hush was alive. Not just in me, but in them. In the quiet between shots. In the breath before the decision. In the moment when silence stops being absence and becomes knowing. This was Echo Range. A place beyond numbers. Beyond noise. And in that stillness, I realized. I hadn't been the 12th flame. I had only carried it for a while. Now it passed on. Still burning. Still whispering. Still waiting.